So I want to press you a little bit on the distinction, because in Lamont, the prohibition worked directly on the American. Like, you have to specifically request this information that comes. This is working kind of as Justice Kagan's questions were pressing you. This is working on ByteDance. It's not saying to your creators, you can't post on ByteDance. That's indirectly going to happen if ByteDance chooses itself not to permit TikTok to walk away with the code. So does that matter, that distinction between Lamont and this case?
No, for two reasons. One, under the Sorrell case, you look to not just the law itself, but its practical operation. And the practical operation is prevent us from working with ByteDance. So that's one answer. And you bring up Lamont, and Lamont's actually a very important case, I'm sure you all recognize here. It's important to look not just at the court's opinion, but look at the briefing in that case. The government itself never came in and argued there's no right to receive this information. That's the sort of greater argument. All the government argued was, of course Americans have a right to receive this, but it's just not so much of a burden to require them to raise their hand to get it. So Archibald Cox, when he was the Solicitor General, said to the court quite explicitly in the brief, we're not even going to make this argument because we think it's so contrary to history and tradition. All we're going to argue is the burden isn't enough. Now what happened is the DC Circuit kind of turned that upside down and said, oh, Lamont's just a case about the burden. Well, that's because that's the only argument the government was even willing to make in this court. There was no argument that Americans didn't have the right to hear that speech.
What about, so I think this goes to Justice Gorsuch's questions about antitrust divestiture. Let's say that for antitrust reasons, or let's even say not for that. Let's say for suspect First Amendment reasons, Congress tells Jeff Bezos that he has to divest in the Washington Post. He can no longer own the Post. And let's say that neither Bezos nor the Post challenges that. But let's say that you represent clients who really like the Post as it was, who really want to keep receiving the Post, who really want to publish op-eds in the Post. Yeah. Would you have standing? Like, what kind of a claim would you be making there?
I believe so, Justice Barrett, and the court has cited Lamont and other cases in more recent years to say we've recognized a right of American listeners to receive information from others. And remember, even that is that's only a small part of the argument I'm making on behalf of the creators. I don't mean to diminish Mr. Francisco's arguments on behalf of the company and ByteDance, but the core speech in front of you in this case are the videos and other forms of communication that people like my clients are posting by the millions every day on this platform to share with other Americans.
Can you win is it possible for you to win and Mr. Francisco to lose, or you rise or fall together?
No, I think it's possible. I mean, I don't think we should. But
was it possible for you to win and him to lose? I mean, you want to win.
Let me put it this way. If you were to conclude that something about the corporate ownership structure, and I think there was some conversation about this earlier, impeded Mr. Francisco from being able to assert full-throated First Amendment rights in this case, I would step in and say, well, certainly we can do that and get you to the strict scrutiny. And then the arguments pretty much line up. Then you're in a question of, can the government satisfy strict scrutiny? And I think, Mr. Chief Justice, you asked about, do we have cases for this and that? I think that the idea is, yes, we have cases that say, once you're in strict scrutiny, that regulating the content because you don't think it's going to be pro-American enough or it's going to be too pro-foreign interest is just verboten under the First Amendment. That's the history and tradition. And Justice Kavanaugh, when you asked about the broadcast cases, they're grounded not just in scarcity, but they're grounded in scarcity in a particular way. And it has to do with the absolute need Congress has for licensing in a world of scarce resources. And so that's the very small carve-out that even in Turner, the court wouldn't extend to cable television that exists for broadcast licensing. And if you look on the 200+ years of our country for any other example of foreign ownership of media being regulated by Congress, let alone being permitted in the case law, you are not going to find it. And I think the reason why is because everybody has understood that if you're not in a world of scarcity where licensing is impossible, you cannot give the government, and in this more extreme example, the president himself, unbridled discretion to choose who is a proper owner of a speech platform in this country. Because it is so hand in hand with viewpoint. As I said earlier, any number of owners of big media enterprises, whether they be Americans or foreign citizens, could be accused of having a particular viewpoint, but speakers who engage in those platforms have choices they can make. And so, on behalf of our creator clients, we find it we find it not at all satisfactory to be told, well, look, just go post somewhere else. It's not enough to tell a writer, well, you can't publish an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal because you can publish it in the New York Times instead. Just like here to say, you can publish it on Instagram or some other platform, not just TikTok. TikTok has a distinct editorial and publicational perspective, and it particularly benefits people like my clients who are not famous people, they're not actors from Hollywood who have a lot of people following them, they're ordinary American citizens whose content that they create on the platform gets privileged by way of the quality of that content. And that's what's so powerful about the platform. So whether you're an ordinary American citizen or, I might add, whether you're a presidential candidate in our last election, if you want to reach new and different audiences, TikTok is the place people go.
This may not make any difference